The roots of health reform go back probably to the mid-1980s.
What we wanted was a situation that when someone was ill, the question was, where does it hurt, not how will you pay?
I think among Democrats, there's always been very broad support from the time that President Truman first proposed it. Very strong support for the notion that all Americans should have decent, affordable health care. I'm not sure there are many Republicans that disagree with that either. It's all a question of how you do it.
We called for a commission to really look at the law and to try to move to universal coverage. So that was sort of the beginnings. We originally called the organization the Committee for the Medically Uninsured, and fortunately we changed it to Healthcare for All very quickly.
The Healthcare for All put together a coalition with parents with kids with disabilities, people with disabilities, uninsured folks, and seniors, especially low-income seniors, all of whom were constituencies that were harmed directly by the way the system was set up.
The Boston Globe, and Dick Knox was the healthcare reporter at the time, was very, very intrigued by this new configuration of voices, and interviewed Sue Sherry a lot, and also was very attentive to interviewing some of these other organizations who were pushing this, the consumer interests in this reform package.
It is like herding cats, but cats or cattle can be herded, even though each one is going in a slightly different direction.
We were empowering people to speak out and to have political influence who traditionally didn't, who were challenging the status quo. And we were moreover, taking it one step further and saying they should be involved in policy, making policy change. And they did.
The first big high water mark was in 1988 when the state passed and Governor Michael Dukakis signed a bill called the Universal Health Care Law of 1988. It was very aggressive, it was very big, it included a very significant mandate on almost all employers to provide full health insurance to their workers and their families.
And the part of pay or play that was so important, forcing corporations to pay something into healthcare, never passed because it didn't have a grassroots constituency.
At that point, Bill Weld didn't favor the bill and wasn't prepared to implement it. And as a result, we weren't able to fully implement what I had signed, and that's one of the risks in this business.
So we were not able to ever implement that law, even though we got it passed and signed. We delayed it several times and then ultimately gave away the mandate to win some other important advances in 1996.
This is where the public health community came together with the health access community. There had been a split in the past. We were able to really bring people together to understand this could be a win-win. The only people who were going to oppose a tobacco tax to improve health access for kids and for low-income adults was the tobacco industry and the governor.
I think the public always feels more comfortable about tax revenue if they know where it's going and they believe where it's going is something that's important.
And he went to the Cancer Society. I think Don Goditis was president then, and they agreed to enter into this rather unique partnership.
It was messy. I have to say, it was messy. I'd love to say that it's all very linear. We had meetings that rolled out. Oh, people are involved, and people are passionate about what they are passionate about. And we wanted to expand people's horizons and see that you could address tobacco control and access by this mutual program, and it worked.
In 1996, we passed legislation in Massachusetts that became the model really for the CHIP program. Senator Kennedy understood what we did, started working with Orrin Hatch to raise the tobacco tax federally to expand coverage for kids.
There'd been a big law passed in 1988. There was another gigantic one in 1996. And so we thought, well, you know, the state seems to have the appetite for this once a decade. And so if it's going to happen in this decade, from 2003 perspective, what's the year? And we thought it would be 2006. It came out of a base of consumers, consumer organizations, unions, healthcare leaders, physicians, hospital leaders, others, state officials, politicians, who agreed with this priority and were committed to staying with it over the long term, not necessarily set on it has to be one way.
So while everyone recognized and had in their heart and had worked on before the need for us to expand coverage in the Commonwealth, the first thing we did was really do the analysis that allowed people to come around the table and say, yep, we agree, this is the problem, and we really need to address it.
And so what we had to do was work with academic experts and others to kind of come up with rough estimates of how many people would be enrolled, what their costs would be, how we'd pay for that.
The time we spent together listening to people at the Urban Institute, and then the work we did to follow up, to work through some difficult questions, brought us to the conclusion that in fact the individual mandate, coupled with the right kinds of changes in government programs and the right kinds of incentives for businesses to work with their employees to participate, could be the right answer.
We got a lot of research out via the Healthcare for All blog, which became a very central place for getting information out. The Blue Cross Foundation did multiple events. The WBUR at the time and the Boston Globe both extensively covered the campaign and the step-by-step it took to pass health reform. So that was a vehicle for getting out some of our findings.
Everyone committed resources, so that it was the resources either in kind or monetary went into the campaign.
Without money, you can't reach too many people. With a lot of money, but no big ideas, no effective way of expressing it and getting others to collaborate, nothing happens.
We did a lot of work with other philanthropies here in Boston that had been focused mainly on charitable funding, that is, funding the gaps in the system, in the health system, and not necessarily about changing the system. This was very effective, and a number of foundations saw the result, and they started funding in the same mode of funding community-based organizations that were advocating for change in housing, in addition to groups that were joining forces to change the healthcare system.
We briefed the leadership team on what we were doing with those resources. And sometimes the in-kind was a whole policy team from, for instance, the Cancer Society was incredibly helpful. And so they weren't working on many campaigns with us with a lot of lift. They were working on a few campaigns with us with specific tasks. And that went a long way to building buy-in, but also bringing diverse talent to the table.
What you really had was a number of organizations leaning in, offering everything that they had, because we all thought maybe we can make this work.
But what we brought to this campaign was an enormous people power. And having groups like GBIO and SEIU and others put the public pressure on the political system to pass meaningful expansion of health coverage.
Well, GBIO was just indispensable. They, along with some other organizations, Neighbor to Neighbor and Coalition for Social Justice in Southeastern Mass, those were the three that were the grassroots citizen organizations that when we had hearings, press conferences, events, whatever, they were able to turn out so many real-life people with real-life stories. And the beauty, though, of GBIO that separated them, they were just so well organized and so committed.
There was no organization in the state of Massachusetts that had accumulated, from a religious standpoint, that could bring a religious moral voice to the question of healthcare like GBIO, because of the fact that we were this remarkable partnership of representing the world's great religions and crossing all these different lines.
The labor unions were significant with us in doing this work. Massachusetts labor union landscape was changing at the time of the campaign, and that could have been disruptive, and that could have meant that it would actually take resources away from us. But we worked closely with 1199, SEIU 1199, to pull them together into the coalition.
We had money, we had bodies, we had, the databases and the, mapping abilities and all the things you do with political work. So I think they saw us as an important resource, but probably more importantly, bodies and members. We're all healthcare workers.
And the ACT Coalition was committed to working through the legislative process to pass a law through the legislature. We were concerned that if there wasn't some pressure, it was possible nothing would happen. So MassAct was formed as a ballot initiative committee to collect the signatures and put on the ballot in November 2006 a ballot initiative that would create a universal health coverage program for the state.
And of course, the legislature doesn't like that at all, because citizens put it on the ballot, they have to eat it.
A bit more aggressive than what the state would have preferred. And so that was our kind of stick, right? And what we needed to do was collect over 100,000 signatures and in order to get it certified.
We basically scared the legislature in a way, because we collected a lot of signatures to put it on the ballot, and they, in their infinite wisdom, decided they should do something about it.
So that's what put us in the political game with the Speaker and the Macy at the time, and the President of the Senate, Travellini at the time, and Governor Romney.
And there was a new Speaker, Sal DeMacy, who didn't know health at all, but he had a very smart health committee chair and very good staff, a woman named Pat Walrath. And she presented him the issue. She said, one side wants an individual mandate and doesn't want employer requirements, and one wants the reverse. And Sal was the one who had the insight to say, well, why don't we do both? Why don't we put both of them together? And we thought, actually done in the context of giving people meaningful, full, decent, affordable, quality coverage, that it was a concession that was worth making to see if we could move forward and get to a near universal coverage framework.
We were all different. We were Republicans, we were business people, we were union people, but we had a commitment to get to some understanding, and we did it. And I'm proud to have been a part of that. I hope my son someday, reads back and say, "Oh, you did that, Ma? I didn't realize that's what you were going."
I still remember 5 o'clock in the morning on the day that we signed into law. My phone just kept ringing. It was the New York Times, the Washington Post, PBS NewsHour, all, they were going to have reporters on site for the signing and wanting to get quotes. And I couldn't believe at that point it was real. I mean, it seemed, up until then, it seemed like this incredible journey I had been on, and we'd been able to create this momentum. But then when the outside world was documenting it in such a way, then it became quite real. And it was an incredibly fun journey.
Looking back on it now, these many years, it puts a smile on my face, because we did really good basic work. It wasn't like we took the program off the shelf and said, here it is, let's do it. We learned as we went. We had fun, we had arguments, we disagreed, we resolved it, and we moved forward, because it was the mission. Everybody knew what the end point was that we needed to get to.
So I guess the advice is build a broad coalition, pick your battles, but be willing to be bold. No state had ever done what we had done before.
Be flexible and opportunistic in your choices. Don't get stuck on it's one way or the highway. Understand that you're going to have to make adjustments, even for things that at the start you never could have imagined yourself embracing.
You really do have to have some solid data and information to start with. You can feel very passionate about an issue and try to push a campaign forward, but if you don't have information and data upon which people can agree and sort of then launch their work together, it's very hard.
It's worth putting the time in to getting those arguments thought through, to taking on the toughest questions that your particular cause may have. We knew that the key question was, how do you organize this? What's the core of the financing? Is it an employer mandate? Is it an individual mandate? And that until we had come up with those options and come up with one that we thought was the best and we could explain why it was the best, that this wasn't going to go anywhere.
How do you keep your coalition engaged? How do you keep the players who are committing both personal time and monetary time seeing that this is a good investment? And stories are invaluable to that. We can all see how the regulations, if shifted, could improve lives, but having documented real first-hand stories of what the difference would make gives a lift to everyone's spirits.
If you're a key legislator, and especially if you're governor, the first thing you do, and I teach this now to my students, both here at UCLA and at Northeastern, is that you reach out to anybody and everybody that has an interest in that particular policy, and you bring them into the process at the earliest possible time.
Elected officials never hear from constituents. They hear from lobbyists, or they hear from their mother-in-law, but they never hear from real constituents in an organized fashion. And it's a big escape clause if they can say, no, I'm going to do this because I've had hundreds of constituents who vote every year in my district to ask me to do it.
You really need to build a movement, which means lots of collaboration, and it means bringing lots of different capacities to bear. It's not just being smart about policy. It's not just doing grassroots organizing. It's not just doing good media work. It's putting all those things together in a strategic way, and being smart about what your opportunities are.